Welcome and thanks for tuning in. In this video, I'm going to show how I use Vectric Aspire software and my ShopBot Desktop CNC machine to make these nice carved boxes. They're basically walnut boxes. One of them has a lid that is domed and it has a crab cut into it. The other has a lid that is flat, and I've laminated a holly crab, and I think you'll find it very interesting how this is done. So, hope you enjoy. Cutting out the bases for the box is fairly straightforward. I do it in a block of 8. We do the rough cut out of the pocket using a 1/2-inch end mill spiral up cut, and then go around the perimeter of the pocket on the inside with a 1/2-inch ball nose spiral up cut to give us a nice rounded corner at the bottom. And finally, the cutout around the outside just uses a 1/4-inch straight end mill with an upcut spiral. Now the tops for my boxes, they're designed to fit into the box with a nice little raveted edge and a nice dome cut into the underside. And the first thing I do is I draw some alignment pinholes, top and bottom, that I can put dowels into. The idea is that when I screw this down to the spoil board, the first thing I'll do is I'll cut those alignment holes which are centered on the work, put dowels in there, cut the rest of this, and then when I'm ready to cut the other side, the top side, the show side, I can flip this work, reinsert the dowels, and I know I'll get perfect alignment. First of all, I make the dome itself, okay, and that dome itself, again, I use the Create Shape toolpath, just dish it out with that, and that dish is 0.3291 inches deep, a nice gentle dish. So then I go ahead and make the tool paths. The first tool path is, as I said, the 2 dowel holes right there. The next tool path is to make the rabbets, and then finally I go ahead and model the dish using a 1/2-inch ball nose, and there we are, all dished out. Now I can go ahead and flip this over and cut the show side. The first step was to make the shape for the dome and then add the crab model on top of that. So using the Create Shape tool, I made a dome, and then I imported the crab and simply added it to the dome, sizing it properly so that it would fit nicely on the lid. After that, it's a pretty straightforward matter of simply creating the tool paths, the rough tool path with a 1/4-inch bit, the finished tool path with a 1/16-inch ball nose, and finally the cutout with tabs with a 1/4-inch bit, and we were done. The first cuts were the 2 dowel holes, and then I inserted the dowels, went ahead and cut the rabbet, and then I cut the dish, and then I flipped the piece and did the rough cut on the top, then the finished cut with the 1/16-inch ball nose bit, and finally the cutout, and I got a couple of tabs left, and that's it. And that way I get good, perfect orientation between the top and the bottom. Got to get rid of all these fuzzies so that this piece will sit nice and flat after I flip it. In making the flat top with the crab, it's done in 2 steps. You need to build what we'll call the base of the top, the part that the holly crab is glued to. So to do that, you use a tool called the Shape Profile, which simply takes this oval and extrudes it up with a specified angle. I specified 85 degrees on the sides, and I wanted the base height of that to be 1/4 inch. This is to be the bulk of the top. With that done, the next step is to import the crab. Import that crab model to be added to the top. The tricky part here is the crab is to be holly, but the base is to be walnut. And what you ideally want is for the cutter to cut exactly through all the holly, leaving the crab, but not cutting into the walnut. I'm going to glue the holly to the walnut just using some Type Bond. I want a nice light color glue line. Going to roll this on with a foam roller. And I'm just going to glue one surface. And get the 3 pieces nice and evenly spaced in the bag. Slide on a piece of coated masonite. And then my top caul with all the grooves cut into it. You can see how this is done in some of my other videos where I go into more detail on vacuum bagging. The glue up has been in the bag for an entire night. Got a little bit of bow in them, which you kind of expect since the glue line is here, and that's where the wood absorbed the water, so you need to let it just settle out a little bit. Cutting the tops for this layered box has been quite a challenge, and I started trying to cut the layered part. On my first attempt, the bit went through the crab all the way, and parts of the holly were missing. So I changed the Z height of the Z0 and tried again, and this time some of the holly was left behind. So I experimented with that again a couple of times, and I realized a couple things. First of all, the crab starts from a very high, thick body and necks all the way down to practically nothing at the claws. And it's that nothing that is very critical, is getting the exact height of the cutter bit so you don't lose the nothing part, the end of the claw. So I decided I needed to make the crab thicker. So in order to get the crab model such that the cutter won't go all the way through the holly, I have to actually set this crab on a little pedestal that is the same outline as the crab. Imagine a 60 thousandths inch high crab outline pedestal with straight sides, and then the actual crab model with all its undulations mounted on top of that. That's what I did, so that 60 thousandths high pedestal I could then set halfway into the walnut, and if my Z0 was off a little bit either way, I'd be cutting into that pedestal part, not into the crab part. So to do that, I made the crab itself 0.1025 inches thick, and I made the pedestal 0.06 inches thick, or 60 thousandths. And together they added up to make this entire crab the height that I wanted it to be. This idea of the pedestal that I'm talking about, if you look there at the crab, it looks like a cliff that goes all the way around the crab. And that cliff is that pedestal I was telling you about. And then the actual crab model is mounted onto that cliff. What I did in my initial setup was I set the model to be 30 thousandths below the top of the holly. That means that that pedestal would sink 30 thousandths into the walnut. So when the ShopBot is actually doing the cutting, it's cutting that 30 thousandths into the walnut if I perfectly set the Z0 at the top of the holly. If I'm off a little bit on that, then I've got that 30 thousandths to play with. The model can move up or down, and I'll still retain all of my holly, all of my crab in my holly. I'll just have a little less or more of the walnut as part of that pedestal. I hope that makes sense. It took me a long time to get my head around it and to get it to where it would work. Another thing I learned was how to actually zero the bit. If you look at the entire piece of work, normally you would use the zeroing plate on the top of the material in this case. But what I found is that it was very difficult for me to machine that layer of holly the perfect thickness I needed, which was 0.1625 inches. So finally I decided, wait a minute, why don't I try to use as a reference that interface glue joint between the holly and the walnut. If that's the reference, that glue joint, then all I have to do is get my bit where it is lined up with that glue joint, and then move the bit up in the Z axis 0.1625 inches and set that as Z0 in the ShopBot software. At that point, I know that no matter how thick the holly really is, it doesn't matter, because the reference for calculating the Z0 was that glue interface. And so that's what I ended up doing, and it worked. Now, with the crab thicker, I was able to actually set it down into the work somewhat. The actual carving included not just the holly, but a little bit of walnut underneath. And I had a little wiggle room, and this one turned out pretty well. You might be able to see how this body and the claws are actually raised up slightly. No matter how many machines you have, you still got to do hand sanding. Nothing high-tech here, just a little deft clear wood finish semi-gloss. A little homemade booth, a couple air conditioning filters, fan blowing everything outside. Works pretty good. Oh, and my Lazy Susan turntable. Well, here's how these two boxes turned out. I especially like the look of the holly box with the lamination. Let's just see how nicely that turned out. The dome box turned out nice as well. The crab is a little more subdued, but you have that nice domed effect. I want to thank you for watching.